Here, this ship, to be clear, was not a U.S. ship. It's a Marshall Islands flag ship, and no Americans on board. But it was a U.S. guided missile destroyer, the USS Farragut, that answered a distress call. Elements from the Iran Revolutionary Guards, they have their own navy. They attempted to force this ship into Iranian waters. The ship's captain refused, issued a distress call. The Iranian ships then fire across the cargo ship's bow. This is a big cargo ship. It's owned by Maersk, one of those big cargo lines. They fire shots across the bow. The captain gives in, but by this point, the U.S. Navy has already answered the distress call. They were some 60 miles away when it happened, so they weren't, right on top of the ship. But the ship is now in Iranian hands, and I'm told by a senior U.S. military official that even as it heads now further into Iranian waters, it is U.S. warplanes that are monitoring its status. This is interesting, John and Kate. You'll remember last week we had an Iranian convoy headed towards Yemen, and you had U.S. Navy ships, including an aircraft carrier, diverted down there to watch and kind of send a signal, don't go there. To have this happen just a few days later with the U.S. Navy involved, it just shows how close Iranian and U.S. naval warships and military assets are over there. And just, these things can get very tense very quickly.
Absolutely. It looks like that's exactly what happened in this situation. This news is really breaking. Jim jumping on the phone with us. Jim, we'll get back to you as Jim gets more on this breaking news that we're getting right now. All right, let's turn back to Baltimore, though. At this hour, more than 500...
Right, and you join us back here on CNN International. I'm Becky Anderson at Dubai's international humanitarian city. More on the Nepal earthquake and its aftermath in a moment. I want to get you, though, to another major story that we are following, the riots that have rocked the U.S. city of Baltimore in Maryland. Hundreds of National Guard troops are moving in to help avoid what would be a repeat of what we saw in some neighborhoods there last night. Absolute chaos. Now, the mayor's office says 19 structures and more than 140 vehicles were torched. 15 police officers were injured and more than 200 people were arrested. Now, the damage so extensive that some buildings were still smoldering in the morning. Now, the violence broke out after the funeral of Freddie Gray, a black man who died of spinal injuries he suffered while in police custody. Joe Jones, is in Baltimore. He's following this story for us and he joins us now. What do you got, Joe?
Hi, Becky. This is City Hall in Baltimore. Behind me are National Guardsmen. They are guarding the building. There certainly hasn't been any attempt to get in there, but sporadic problems during the night. And underscoring the seriousness of that, the National Guard was brought in, about 1,500 of them. This city had a very bad night, and it's the kind of night that can affect a city for a very long time. Baltimore had been sort of scratching its way back from difficult days, and down along the Baltimore Harbor, nice buildings, stadiums, what have you, venues for entertainment. And now this, in West Baltimore mostly, rioting, police officers injured. And the question, of course, has become, how could all of this happen? And there is already some question as to whether the mayor and the police commissioner were a bit too permissive with people who were protesting, allowing them to have more and more latitude to the point where it turned into violent confrontations and looting. So there will be an after-action report on that. Meanwhile, there's a curfew that is on the city of Baltimore this evening around 7 o'clock, try to keep people inside. Not clear yet what this city is going to do about some of the nighttime activities, including the Baltimore Orioles baseball team scheduled to play a home game here. Baltimore is watching and waiting and hoping we don't have another night of trouble, Becky.
Yeah, we're just looking at the pictures from yesterday and today. What's the atmosphere like at present?
Depends on where you are. I think there's a certain amount of tenseness, but there's also a lot of cleanup going on in the neighborhoods. Last night we were out actually seeing some of the looters going in and out of stores, seeing some of the damage they've done to some of the stores. Now people in those communities are trying to figure out how they're going to rebuild or whether they're going to move on, which is a problem for the economy of the city of Baltimore. When you tear down resources like the drugstore that's on the corner or the beauty supply store that's around the corner, the question is whether that's ever going to come back or whether those people are going to relocate. So that causes a problem. And when you think about it, what we saw a lot of here in this city last night was young people who were going from corner to corner, block to block, starting fires and what have you. And it was the parents and it was the faith leaders, it was the Nation of Islam, it was the fraternity Omega Psi Phi. They were out on the corner trying to get people to stop. So it certainly didn't appear that there were.
All right, and I just seem to have lost communications with Joe Johns there, but you heard his report. You're watching CNN special coverage of the aftermath of the earthquake in Nepal. We're live from Dubai's humanitarian city this hour, where tons of aid has yet to be shipped out. Countries around the world have answered the call for assistance, but much of that aid is not getting to the people who need it most. The United Arab Emirates is sending 4 tons of aid, but much of it has been packaged right here in Dubai and loaded onto jumbo jets. Those flights have not received clearance to take off, I'm afraid. Relief organisations at the international airport in Nepal's capital say the tarmac there is jam-packed with cargo planes, and several aircraft loaded with essential supplies have already been turned away. Well, for more on this aid operation, I'm joined by Nicole Nasser. She's the Gulf Area Managing Director for SOS Children's Villages International, joining me here now. You have 800 people, I believe, working in Nepal, running 7 villages with orphans. What are the specific challenges that you face with this emergency?
As in any emergency, we think that the children are the most vulnerable ones in those situations. And as you can imagine, on the ground, there's chaos, and of course, there's a lot of destruction, and children are, traumatized, and they can't sleep at home. People are really scared. They are not in their homes. They have to sleep outside. It was raining, 2 days. And for kids, of course, it's the most difficult thing.
What do you think the most difficult things will be for aid agencies trying to get in the coming weeks?
I guess, as you're saying, we see the packages here. It's really to get the logistics running. Yeah, we're lucky. We are on the ground, so we have, infrastructure of 10 SOS villages there, and we have the staff, and they're providing first aid. But it's to get it, we need water. We need.
Sure. And talk to me. You talked about the logistics. Let's talk about the logistics of actually coordinating these operations. We're hearing about the chaos at Kathmandu area. We're hearing that the Nepalese government isn't giving permission for many of these flights with much needed aid to land. How do all you agencies, the agencies, coordinate to respond to something like this?
Well, usually there's clusters, and it's, every NGO, every organization is working together with the government, So under the government who is coordinating, but in the first days, everybody is trying to struggle through and get their, and just help the people out there, like SOS, because we are there and we're helping in the neighborhood, and we're just providing at the moment our stuff that we have, our infrastructure, and giving it out. So we opened the SOS Children's Villages in Chowpatty, for example, and it's, people are sleeping all over the places. So our schools of SOS that we also run in Nepal, they're open, and they're, in shelter for the people there. And
how much of the work that you do is outside of Kathmandu? Because clearly at present it's very difficult to get any sense and scope of the destruction outside of the capital city.
So we have actually 3 SOS villages and programs right away in the Kathmandu Valley. And our youth, because we have over 500 youth that are taken care of, who are with SOS, and more than 1,500 children there, and they are organizing themselves. So they organize committees, so the youths are out and go to the rural villages and rescuing people. Really, it's because we are there and we are running out. And it's but some villages, and I just got it from the ground today. It's they were actually reaching a village, and they were the first ones there on the ground, but they couldn't help. They have to walk there. There is no possibility. Sometimes some of the villages are like 2 walking days away because you can't access those rural areas.
It's very, very tough. We're going to leave it there. We thank you very much indeed for joining us here. The operation slowed down just a little bit here at Dubai's International Humanitarian City, but as John Defteris was reporting just earlier on, they're sort of working in waves and shifts here, and it will crack on again in the hours to come. But as we've been reporting, it's simply very difficult to get the aid. Gets out of here, but it just doesn't get out of the Emirates at present. They're just waiting for permissions for licenses, for air clearance to actually get this aid out of here and to the people who need it most. The latest world news headlines are just ahead. Plus, reconstruction efforts in Nepal could exceed $5 billion. We're following the very latest tonight, live from Dubai.
There is a saying in Nigeria, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It is often important to find the right balance between the two, and for this we all need the right support. First Bank, championing SME development in Africa through First Bank SME Connect.
The World Right Now with Hala Gorani, live from London. Weeknights on CNN.
Innovators, influencers, they've reached the top and are today's leading women. Inspiring individuals sharing their insights on CNN. This month, you know their names, maybe you've worn the dress or walked in the shoes. What it took for Diane von Furstenberg and Tory Burch to become fashion icons.
This year we celebrate our 40th anniversary of the wrap dress, and that dress I owed everything.
Leading Women, Saturday on CNN.
Where will the business story go today?
Recognising the A350 is easy.
How quickly are those laws going to have an impact on Italy's unemployment?
CNN journalists go to the places.
Do you understand the Tesla phenomenon?
To the people.
Hi, Richard.
To the heart of the question. Your financial future is at stake, and we'll help you make sense of it all around the globe. CNN Business.
I'm John Hawes. This is CNN.
You're watching a special hour of CNN from Dubai's International Humanitarian City tonight. The top stories for you this hour. And Nepal's Prime Minister has declared 3 days of national mourning. The death toll from Saturday's devastating earthquake now tops 4,600 and is certain to rise. The UN estimates 8 million people have been affected, some in desperate need of food, water and shelter. The US city of Baltimore is under a state of emergency after riots broke out on Monday night. More than 150 fires were set, most of them car fires. At least 15 police officers were injured and more than 200 people have been arrested. Now, this violence erupted after the funeral of Freddie Gray, a black man who suffered a fatal spinal injury while in police custody. 9 people convicted of drug-related offences could be executed in Indonesia in the next few hours. 8 of those set to face the firing squad are foreigners, including 2 Australians and a woman from the Philippines. The prisoners' families made their final visit to the island where they are being held. And we are just learning about the arrests of dozens of militants in Saudi Arabia over the past 5 months. A spokesman for the Saudi Interior Minister says that 93 people with suspected ties to ISIS have been taken into custody since December. And he says militants planning a suicide attack on the US Embassy in Riyadh were arrested last month. Well, back to Nepal for you, and doctors and nurses are struggling to keep up with the thousands of patients who need care there. There are shortages of everything, I'm afraid, from medical equipment to beds, and surgeons have been forced to operate in less than ideal conditions, and that includes our very own doctor, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who treated a young girl with a very serious brain injury. Here is his report.
Thousands were killed during the initial quake, and without urgent medical care, many thousands more will likely die.
We've made our way into one of the busiest hospitals here in Kathmandu. This is Bir Hospital, and this is actually a lobby area. This is normally a lobby area, but you get an idea of just how chaotic the scene is over here. This area over here, they've simply set up just for people with brain injuries, spinal cord injuries. It's very challenging. They don't have enough ventilators. They don't have enough monitors. As you can see over here, they actually are doing some procedures right at the bedside because there's not enough operating room capabilities.
Operations performed right in the hospital lobby. This facility so overwhelmed, dozens of patients are actually forced to wait outside until medical personnel can give them care.
We're nearly 2 days now after the earthquake, and you can still get an idea of just how busy things are. We're at the busiest hospital in this particular area. Emergency vehicles keep coming in. Patients either being rescued, finally found, finally making their way through the traffic and the chaos to get to the hospital. And these patients are the lucky ones. I mean, you get so many more patients still out there waiting to be found.
One of those lucky ones is 8-year-old Selena. Her journey here from the countryside has taken more than a day. Her grandfather explains to doctors that the family house simply collapsed on her. She spent hours in the rubble before being rescued. Selena's dazed, clearly in pain from injuries to her head, but examining her CAT scan reveals just how dire her situation is. She has a fractured skull, a blood clot, and her brain is swelling. Without emergent surgery, she'll have permanent damage, or like so many other earthquake victims, she'll die. As a practicing neurosurgeon, I'm asked to assist in the operation. It's called a craniotomy. The conditions and equipment available to us are more like what you'd find in a war zone, rather than an operating room. But the operation is a success, and Selena will live.
Mr. President, I'm Sanjay Gupta.
Nepal's president, Ram Baran Yadav, is also a doctor. He says his country is facing a medical calamity never seen before, and he asks for any assistance from the international community. There's no doubt Nepal needs all the help it can possibly get. How soon this ends is unclear. As they bring in more patients from more remote areas, it's likely the demand for these beds is just going to go up. At times they lose power, and there's still the question of these aftershocks and these tremors. Every time one happens, do you evacuate the patients? Do you leave them here in the hospital? What do you do? It's a question they're trying to answer almost every single day. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Well, high-altitude rescue efforts underway in what is this very difficult terrain of Mount Everest after the earthquake produced deadly avalanches there. Reuters reporting that up to 250 people are missing after an avalanche hit a village in Rasuwa district. It is a popular trekking area north of the capital, Kathmandu. Well, base camp on the Nepali side of Mount Everest was hit on Saturday, and many climbers and their guides are still waiting for help to get down from the slopes. In worsening weather, helicopter pilots are risking their lives trying to get the stranded climbers to safety.
As you can see behind me, there's clouds coming in, bad weather's on its way, high winds are coming in from the Tibetan plateau, and so they've only got a certain amount of time to extract these 70 people. The difficulty is that once they land here, many of these people have no camps, no tents, no nothing left. Everything's strewn all over the glacier. So the only thing they've got is what they land with in that helicopter, what's in their packs.
Well, climbers who were on Everest when that happened came face to face with a terrifying and deadly force. Phil Black has a story for you.
It started as a distant rumble.
The ground is shaking.
Jost Kobush, the man behind the camera, quickly realized something was wrong. Seconds later, a towering cloud of ice and debris was upon him. smashing through the Everest Base camp. It was over in less than 2 minutes.
No, wait, maybe there's coming more.
The 27th of April, early morning in base camp.
Nick Chinsky lived through that too, sheltering inside a tent. He sent us this short video report.
70 some odd people are trapped up above the ice fall. The job of these 3 pilots is to extract as many of them as they can in the time they've got.
He's talking about climbers further up the mountainside at camps 1 and 2. Nick says helicopters did their job, returning them all to base camp on Monday. When we spoke to Nick by sat phone, he explained the northern central part of the camp was hit hardest because it had no protection.
The avalanche basically came off the mountain at full speed, and with very little few obstacles, it sort of tore right into their camps.
Nick says that same violent force inflicted terrible damage to the people caught in its path. Some knocked down by flying debris, others picked up and hurled through the air.
We had survivors who were badly broken and crying and moaning and just in absolute agony, and yet there were people that had to pick them up, strap them onto, in some cases, ladders or bits of wood that we could find laying around, because there were no real stretchers.
All of the injured have now been flown out. Those who remain can't climb up, and they don't know if it's safe to walk out. With much of the camp destroyed, they're now sharing shelter, bedding, food and supplies while waiting to decide their next move. Phil Black, CNN, London.
Well, some of Nepal's most treasured historical sites and monuments destroyed in this quake. Centuries-old temples which drew pilgrims to Kathmandu are now in ruins. Nepal draws hundreds of thousands of tourists every year who come to climb Mount Everest or see the picturesque and ancient temples in the valley there. But now this disaster will no doubt hurt that industry and the overall economy. John Defterius back with us, our emerging markets economist, for more on that. Just how damaging is this going to be, John?
Well, first and foremost, this is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's often overlooked because you talk about the heritage sites, Mount Everest and the base camps and people trying to hike, but the per capita income, GDP, is only less than $800 per person. It's one of the most impoverished countries in the world, an unemployment rate of 40%. So tourism is a very important factor, makes up 8% of the GDP, but its number one foreign exchange earner is from the laborers that work primarily in the Gulf states, representing better than 35% of the economy. So what I'm trying to say here, this is an economy that could least afford a major quake. Now, first and foremost, they're worried about the physical infrastructure, the damage to the roads, the damage to the power infrastructure. How do you reach out well beyond Kathmandu? But there's another thing called institutional infrastructure, and this is something that's been lacking terribly in Nepal for the better part of 10 years. They had a Maoist insurgency fighting amongst the government. They had a peace deal recently, which helped put that to rest. But what has happened over the last decade, foreign direct investment has stayed away. Now, I'm one that believes there's a silver lining in all this. When you have a crisis of this magnitude, you could see the countries around Nepal rally to the cause. And we're seeing that initially with the rescue efforts. China, India and Pakistan coming to the fore here. China recently, as you know, launched the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, $100 billion, 57 countries. The United States didn't like the idea that China was stepping forward, but this is a prime example where they could put some of that aid to work.
We also know, and you brought up the Nepali diaspora here, specifically in the UAE and elsewhere in the Gulf, and just how important the money that they send back will be. It makes up something like, I think I'm right in saying, 30 or 40% of GDP. So, I mean, 35%. We're talking 35%. How important is that money going to be going forward?
Well, this is going to be the real test coming forward, because you know for the next 2 or 3 years that the tourism revenue is going to drop quite significantly. If you look at the pictures that we're seeing right now, we know that the rebuilding effort will take time. So tourism revenues will drop. They hope that the remittances will hold together here. You have a number of the Nepalese who are trying to leave the country. So one thing you could see with those leaving the country looking for jobs outside, that we could see the remittances level actually go forward. Now, the institutional infrastructure that I'm talking about is extremely important. Can the leadership in Nepal reach out to the rest of the world and say, we have a sound banking system that could mature with the right support. The legal system's going to be in place, and the infighting that you've seen for the last decade can be parked so we can take advantage of the money that's coming in. Now, we have past examples to point to. If you look back at the 2004 tsunami, the world community, like we're seeing today in Nepal, rallied to the cause, $6 billion put onto the table. You saw with even the typhoon Hainan in the Philippines, almost $1 billion of aid is helping the restructuring take place. You take the other extreme, like in Haiti 5 years ago with the earthquake, the global community led by Bill Clinton, remember, ringing the bell of alarm to put the money in, $3.5 billion. We don't see Haiti turning the corner. One example, you can see it turning to the corner and rallying in infrastructure in the emerging markets. Another one just stays parked and can't move on where it is today.
This, of course, has got to do with how that money is spent when it arrives in the country and the development of these structures that need to be in place. And I've heard much criticism over the last 72 hours of the sort of, the lack of development across that infrastructure that can make things work. That's going to be a big issue, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the other thing that works against this country, and we have to be candid, it's only got a population of 1.4 million people. The infrastructure was creaky at best. I talked about the political infighting that we saw in the country. When emerging market investors look to go into a country, they look for scale. So the size of a Pakistan, India, or China, it welcomes because you have the consumer base. Nepal doesn't have that. So what it needs to come out of this horrible crisis is to suggest it was a wake-up call for us. We're surrounded by high-growth markets. We can offer X, Y, and Z, particularly tourism, right? It has a cultural heritage that can have to rebuild going forward, but it has to prove that it can absorb the global goodwill and the capital that should be at its doorstep as a result of the quake.
Talking about the diaspora, many of those who work in this region, and sadly, as we tried to get into Kathmandu on a scheduled flight in the end, we've been trying to get in with the military yesterday, and their flights were just not getting permission out of here to land in Nepal, so we went in on a scheduled flight. We weren't able to actually land. Many of the people on that flight, of course, were people who were going back. They may have heard nothing from their relatives. They may know that their relatives have now passed away. They may have no idea about what sort of structures are left, what sort of family goods and chattels, as it were, are left. Many of those people are low-income workers.
Yes,
here.
Absolutely.
They are invited in, but they are low-income workers. When I talk about how important their remittances will be going forward, I think the world should understand that there's an enormous volume of people, but their wages are low.
Yeah, that's an understatement. In fact, the average wage, fair to say, in the Gulf states for these Nepalese workers is probably around $500 to $600 a month. They're usually given housing in what they call labor camps here, but low housing, sharing a room with probably four others. They end up exporting about 3/4, if not more, of the $500 or $600 a month. A highly paid worker in the Gulf states is making $800 to $1,000 a month. The Nepalese laborers that you see in the Gulf states, and including here in the UAE, usually making $500 to $600 a month.
John Defterios with you on the story of the day. We're live, thank you, John, from Dubai's humanitarian aid harbours. The relief effort for Nepal begins to take shape. Much more on the earthquake damage just ahead, including new video showing the moment the earthquake shook Tibet. Next up, though, the US city of Baltimore cleaning up and trying to calm down from a night of riots. A closer look at what triggered the violence and how city officials are responding.
From the shores of the Caspian Sea, in the ancient land of Azerbaijan, rises the first European Games. Be part of sporting history in Baku this June. The European Games, Baku 2015, rise to the occasion.
We should be on the air at 6 o'clock as predicted.
Choose to go. Go where no one has gone before.
The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated.
Where no one else will go today. You can go in search of answers, only to find more questions. You might discover something unfamiliar halfway around the world. or uncover something unexpected, far closer to home. Sometimes you might need to look back to see how you got here and where you might be headed. And just when you think your journey's reached an end, you'll be surprised to find it's only just beginning. But you'll keep going, because it's your journey, wherever it goes.
On May the 7th, the United Kingdom goes to the polls in one of the closest general elections in generations. Europe, immigration, the economy, they're all key issues that are dividing voters and could lead to an historic outcome. Join me, Max Foster, Christiane Amanpour, Richard Kress and Hala Garani for complete coverage of the 2015 UK elections on May the 7th on CNN.
A state of emergency is now in effect in the US city of Baltimore after a night of violence and chaos. Rioters there torched cars and buildings, threw rocks at police and looted local businesses. Now, 15 police officers were injured and more than 200 people were arrested. Well, the National Guard has been called in now to help keep the peace. The violence followed the funeral for Freddie Gray, a young man who suffered a fatal spinal cord injury while in police custody. Well, earlier, CNN's Don Lemon spoke with Baltimore's mayor and Maryland's governor about the violence.
We've been standing by in preparation, just in case the violence escalated, which it did. When the mayor called, we activated. We were fully prepared. We had all the assets ready, and we had the order prepared and ready to sign. As soon as the mayor called, we activated.
And I'll say that I think it is. Again, I want to thank the governor for his support, for being here for Baltimore as we bring order. It is a very delicate balancing act to make sure that you protect people's right to free speech, their right to protest. The fact that people exploited the opportunity to protest with violence and looting doesn't mean that I don't have a duty to protect people's right to be heard.
And you said your words were twisted because you didn't allow people. That didn't mean the destruction of property.
What I said very clearly was when you give people, when you facilitate space for people to be heard, that space was exploited by those who meant to do harm to our city. That's what I was saying very clearly. And when the protesters got out of hand and started to destroy property, we used best practices, the way the officers are trained, to make sure that we are focusing on those that were doing the damage, and also working to not escalate. We have seen all over the country and throughout our history what happens when you use too much force to respond to an incident. It escalates and it can be a lot worse. I didn't want that for my city. We're working very hard to contain this and to do it in a way that doesn't turn Baltimore into a military state.
Are there streets now that in Baltimore, or neighborhoods or areas that are still not under police control, not in control?
I think right now we're focused on responding to where the individuals are out. We have control. We are responding to fire. We are responding to police. And we will make sure that the city is open for business tomorrow.
All right, let's switch between stories here because there's a number of breaking or developing stories, at least this hour. I want to get you an update on a story we first broke earlier in the hour. Iran has seized a commercial cargo vessel, and Washington has in turn sent aircraft and naval assets to monitor the situation. Now, a senior U.S. military source tells CNN that no U.S. nationals were on board. Fred Plykin is just back from Tehran and joins us now live from Berlin. What details do you have at this point, Fred?
Hi, Becky. Yeah, this appears to involve a ship that's flagged under the Marshall Islands and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy, which of course is different from the Iranian regular Navy. And it seems as though from both sides of the equation, both the U.S. and the Iranians, that this ship was underway in the Strait of Hormuz, which of course is a very tight waterway between the Gulf of Aden and the Persian Gulf. And the Iranians, for their part, seem to be saying that the ship might have trespassed into Iranian waters and was then directed deeper into Iranian waters by the Revolutionary Guard Navy. The way that a U.S. source tells the story is that apparently the ship was underway in an international waterway when all of a sudden it got the order from the Revolutionary Guard Navy to go deeper into Iranian waters. Apparently the captain initially declined to do this. Then, however, a Revolutionary Guard patrol boat fired several rounds over the ship's bow, and that's when the captain then did what the Revolutionary Guard Navy wanted him to do, and apparently then went deeper into Iranian waters. It's unclear where the ship is right now. However, the latest information that we have is that apparently the Revolutionary Guard Navy has now boarded this vessel. Becky?
Fred Plotkin with the very latest on a story, as I say, that we broke just in the last hour. Still to come, devastation as far as the eye can see. Drones giving us an extraordinary look at the earthquake aftermath in Nepal. Much more on our top story right after this short break. Firstly, though, I want to get you a sense of just how frustrating it is for those around the world that are trying to get search and rescue operations set up to get international aid into the country. I mentioned earlier that our team here in the UAE tried to reach Nepal on a flight carrying aid and military personnel. We were diverted to India due to the continued logjam at Kathmandu airport. Sadly, our story representative of many efforts to reach people who can only survive for so long without help.
Rattles the very top of the world, scattering climbers on Mount Everest and buckling roads in Tibet. Fatalities are reported in both places, but the epicenter of Nepal is truly devastated, and the death toll there is rising.
And aid workers are already warning of an urgent need for food, water, medicine and shelter.
As news of the devastating Nepal earthquake broke on Saturday, so too the appeals for international help. In the UAE, Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Al-Ansari gets the call to deploy and responds immediately.
At the moment, by the request of the Nepalian government, they ask us to stop the search and rescue and focus on the relieving things. For that, we reconfigure the team again, and we are focusing at the moment on the medical support and the communication and the logistic, of course, to offer the food and the shelters for the people.
By early Monday morning, our CNN crew has joined his search and rescue team, who've been ready for some time. Their latest high-tech equipment, cutters, sensors, grinding machines, cameras and dogs loaded onto 2 cargo planes. We wait and we wait. Well, it's Monday mid-morning now. We've been up for about 4 or 5 hours. We're with a search and rescue team from the United Arab Emirates who are flying out to Nepal to help with the aftermath of the earthquake. They're also joined by the Emirates Red Crescent, who are delivering humanitarian aid, food and shelter for those who have lost their homes and their livelihoods out there. We're hoping to get out of here as soon as possible. We've just been told that there's an awful lot of traffic at Kathmandu airport, which is a good thing because at least flights are now getting in. The last 26 hours have been really difficult given the very bad weather conditions and the aftershocks. The clearance from Nepal to fly doesn't come. And while we manage to jump on a commercial flight, the waiting game goes on for Lieutenant Colonel Al-Ansari and his team. Monday night, 2 days after the quake struck, and this is the scene at Kathmandu airport. In the air above, we circle for an hour. But when fuel runs low, our plane diverts to northern India. So we've just stopped to refuel. We are in Lucknow, which is in India, about 120 miles away from Kathmandu, refueling because we were circling around. No chance of getting into the airport there, so hoping to leave here now in an hour or so and get into Kathmandu. It is about local time 9 o'clock now. We're going for some time. By early Tuesday morning, our flight has returned to Abu Dhabi. 12 hours on the plane, all told. And at the Abu Dhabi aviation base, frustration for Lieutenant Colonel Al-Ansari.
We have to do this job. We have to fly whatever the time. For that, this is why the spirit is very high in here between the group, because everybody want to go to do this mission. Morning, night, we are keeping coming in here. Even if we don't have a chance to fly, we keep coming.
Just a sense of the frustration for those who are trying to help. I'm Becky Anderson. That is all from Dubai International Humanitarian City for now. Our rolling coverage of the earthquake disaster in Nepal continues next hour. Thank you for watching.
What is beauty? Is it a view that's been waiting for you for centuries? A setting that gives you goosebumps when you see it for the first time? Is it a moment that stops you in your tracks and leaves you in awe? Some people spend their whole lives looking for it. When you open yourself up to it, suddenly you find yourself in a place where true beauty isn't something you'll ever see. Because when you meet South Africa, you'll reconsider what you think you know.
At the Asian Television Awards, CNN wins Best Documentary Series, Best News Program, Best Current Affairs Presenter, and is honoured as the Cable and Satellite Channel and Network of the Year. This is CNN.
Coming up on Open Court, make way for the clay. The race to Roland Garros heats up in Monte Carlo.
There's no better place to start a clay court season than here.
Plus, they call him the mastermind.
The pressure she has is unbelievable because every time she wins, it's normal. And if she loses, it's what's happening.
Hear what it's like coaching world #1 Serena Williams. And wedding bells are ringing in Scotland. Andy Murray ties the knot. Sunday on Open Court.
In association with Rado.
On May 7th, the UK braces for one of the most uncertain elections in decades, with its European future hanging in the balance. The voter divide is widening. Can the Conservatives take full control? Will the Scotland referendum sway public opinion? And how will immigration affect the numbers? Join me, Christiana Mampour, Richard Quest, and Max Foster for complete coverage of the 2015 UK elections, May 7th on CNN.
I'm Nick Payton Walsh in Kobani, and this is CNN.
Hello and welcome to CNN's continuing coverage of the earthquake in Nepal. I'm Robin Kerno. Humanitarian groups describe a race against time in Nepal after that catastrophic earthquake. The death toll in the region now stands at more than 4,600 people, and officials warn it'll probably rise even higher. More than 9,000 are injured, and some 8 million people have been affected by the quake in the region. Now, relief efforts are ramping up, but teams face all kinds of logistical nightmares getting the aid to where it needs to go. And new videos from a drone photographer show the massive devastation from the skies. This one is said to show a small village that has been completely wiped out. And this one shows another village in the district of Kathmandu. You can see ruined buildings tilting in opposite directions and debris everywhere. Well, let's bring in our senior international correspondent, Awa Damon. She joins us now from Kathmandu. The images shocking, also there on the ground. These terrible stories of loss and grief.
They really are, Robin, and it's such an incredibly difficult time for so many across this country, especially those in these remote areas who at this stage are growing increasingly angered and frustrated with the lack of aid and assistance that is coming out to them. And earlier today, we headed out to an area that is not far from the capital, Kathmandu.
62-year-old Miley Tamang sits quietly, away from the rest of her family. It's as close as she can be to what was her home. Pus and blood has seeped through the crusted bandage on her foot. I just want to cry. All I feel is hurt, she says, showing us where she was the moment the earthquake struck.
Miley Tamang ran out onto the balcony when suddenly this part of the building collapsed, trapping her. She did manage to claw herself free and then crawl out through there, someone helping her up the embankment. The entire roof of this part of the home collapsed, trapping her daughter-in-law, who was freed as well. And right now, this is all that remains of the home that she and her husband worked their entire lives to build.
Other families who lost everything cook lunch by the side of the road, unsure how they will rebuild or even where to start. An old man sifts through the rubble, looking for anything to salvage. We're just 30 kilometers, or about 20 miles from the capital, but it takes an hour and a half by car, a luxury most who live in this rugged terrain don't have. But at least it's accessible. There are parts of Nepal so remote it takes days to reach under normal circumstances. Villages one can only get to on foot. It's those areas that were hardest hit, where aid has yet to arrive, where no one really knows the full extent of human loss or how many tragedies, like the one at this home, have unfolded. Maesh Koirala shows us where his only child, his 2-year-old daughter Prapati, died.
Oh, she was sleeping right here.
He was working the fields when the quake struck. I ran back. I started digging with my hands, Koirala remembers, and I saw her. Blood was trickling from her mouth, and she was covered in cuts. All he has left now is a picture in his phone. And like countless others across this country, a suffering that won't ever fully subside.
And Robin, just making everything more difficult at this stage, whether it's rescue and recovery or people trying to survive out in the open, has been the weather. We were caught in a torrential downpour and ended up sheltering with 4 families in their makeshift tent. And they were just expressing their frustration, their desperation, and also their growing anger, as we were saying earlier. They said, and even though this was an area that is accessible by road, as you saw in that piece, that they had been living on rice ever since the earthquake struck, Robin.
You've seen it for yourself. There's also, besides this growing anger about the fastness of aid, what is the political situation playing into that? I understand that is complicating issues, that the local politics antagonism is also impacting this logjam in terms of getting aid out.
There is some of that is playing into this, and it's a fairly tense situation overall, no matter how you look at it, because people's need is great, and you do have those other governmental dynamics playing into this. And we actually saw some of that in that village that we were at, where the local representative came and people were trying to register the damages that their various homes had sustained. He was saying that around 90% of the homes were uninhabitable just in that area alone, and yet he felt as if not enough was being done in that particular district. People are also wondering how and if and when the government is going to be handing out sort of financial compensation, because this is an incredibly impoverished country. A lot of these areas that were hardest hit are the nation's poorest. They simply do not have the money or the capacity to rebuild on their own.
Awa in Kathmandu, thank you so much for that update. And India's Prime Minister says he and his country will do its best to wipe the tears of everyone in Nepal, and New Delhi is rushing to bring aid to its struggling neighbour. Our Malika Kapoor visited an army base in New Delhi where relief efforts are underway.
Base in New Delhi, where there are boxes and boxes of relief materials piled up waiting to be sent to Nepal. Right here, these boxes, they contain drinking water, and those boxes you can see right there behind me, I can see that they contain food. The boxes say they contain noodles. We are told that basic supplies over there are running very thin indeed. India is at the forefront of relief efforts to Nepal, having already sent tons of drinking water, food, blankets, tents, and medical supplies. Almost every flight that goes in brings evacuees out.
We went in the morning from here to Pokhara. Pokhara, as you know, is the epicenter of the earthquake. The runway is a very difficult runway over there. It is in a bowl, and it does not have a proper standard approach.
Captain Pushkar, a seasoned Air Force pilot, escorted senior citizens off the aircraft.
One lady came to me yesterday. She said the moment she saw smiling Indian faces ready to help them, all her stress and all her distraught was gone.
It's not what these pilots of the Indian Air Force get to do that often, but when they get a chance to help fellow citizens, when they get a chance to do some humanitarian work, they say it feels really satisfying. Malika Kapoor, CNN, New Delhi.
Now, many survivors of the earthquake are staying in tent cities set up around Kathmandu. Some of them are sleeping right by the airport, hoping to leave Nepal. But as CNN's Oren Lieberman now reports, congestion at the airport is making it difficult to leave and, of course, as we said, for aid to get in.
Rain has started to fall here in Kathmandu, adding more chaos to what is already a very hectic situation. I'm standing in the middle of what is effectively a tent city. These people here, these people staying in tents for multiple nights, are not getting any answers. Not from the airlines, not from the embassies. So what they've had to do is find some place to stay, and they want to stay near the airport because it's the best way, the easiest way, and theoretically the quickest way to get out of here, to get home following this earthquake. Except the runway has been closed multiple times with aftershocks, so even the airport itself has had major problems, and now there's an international outpouring of support coming into Kathmandu. These flights are arriving from all over the world, but that only adds to the confusion to some extent. They're bringing in medical aid, supplies, experts, doctors, but it seems there is a bit of chaos there too as they try to get organized, as they try to figure out where they're going, and that means inside the airport here, it's an entirely different situation. It's quiet out here, it's chaotic, it's jam-packed in there as everyone tries to figure out what's going on. You have the competing interests. They're coming in with aid and they're trying to get out. Tourists, visitors are trying to get out on flights. There simply aren't many of them. So here at Kathmandu's International Airport, a very, very hectic situation that will hopefully begin to get sorted out in the coming hours and days. Oren Lieberman, CNN, Kathmandu.
Okay, I want to take you to another story that we've been covering here at CNN. U.S. forces are responding to a distress call from a commercial ship intercepted by Iran. Now, a U.S. official says the Iranian military fired shots across the ship. It's a Marshall Islands flag mask cargo ship after it declined calls to divert from its path in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Chief U.S. Correspondent Jim Shooter joins us by phone from Washington with more. Hi there. There's a lot of information here. Just tell us what's exactly happening now. Where is the ship and what's the status?
Well, it was a remarkable confrontation. This is the Maersk Tigris, a cargo ship, Marshall Islands flagged, as you said, no Americans on board. naval vessels from the Iran Revolutionary Guard stopped it.
Jim Shooter, I'm sorry, Jim. I'm actually going to have to interrupt you. We're going to have to go to another story we've been covering here at CNN. As you can see, U.S. President Barack Obama and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe are at the White House. They're holding a news conference now. We want to listen in.
Expression of mutuality, respect, and shared obligation. It transcends any specific moment or challenge. It's the foundation of a relationship that endures. It's what allows us to say that the United States and Japan stand together. Otegai no tameni, with and for each other. This is the essence of the alliance between the United States and Japan, an alliance that holds lessons for the world. Prime Minister Abe and I had the opportunity yesterday to visit our memorial to President Lincoln, who believed that a great conflict had to be followed with reconciliation. Shinzo, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank you for your visit to Arlington National Cemetery. Your gesture is a powerful reminder that the past can be overcome. Former adversaries can become the closest of allies, and that nations can build a future together. Across 7 decades, our nations have become not just allies, but true partners and friends. And that mutual affection will be on display tomorrow when Shinzo becomes the first Japanese Prime Minister to address a joint meeting of Congress. And we are 2 global partners that stand together for security and human dignity around the world. A opposing Russia's aggression against Ukraine, providing relief to innocent civilians threatened by ISIL, combating Ebola and promoting global health, and now offering help to the people of Nepal, who are in our prayers today. This friendship includes my partnership with Prime Minister Abe. Since taking office, I've worked to rebalance American foreign policy to ensure that we're playing a larger and lasting role in the Asia-Pacific, a policy grounded in our treaty alliances, including our treaty with Japan. And I'm grateful to Shinzo for his deep commitment to that alliance. He is pursuing a vision of Japan where the Japanese economy is reinvigorated and where Japan makes greater contributions to security and peace in the region and around the world. So Shinzo, thank you. I believe the progress we've made today will help to guide the U.S.-Japanese partnership for decades to come. Specifically, we first talked about transforming our security alliance. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, we've updated the guidelines for our defense cooperation. Together, our forces will be more flexible and better prepared to cooperate on a range of challenges, from maritime security to disaster response. Our forces will plan, train, and operate even more closely. We'll expand our cooperation, including on cyber threats and in space. And Japan will take on greater roles and responsibilities in the Asia-Pacific and around the world. Our new guidelines complement our effort to realign U.S. forces across the region, including on Okinawa, in order to lessen the impact of our bases on local communities. And I reaffirmed our commitment to move forward with the relocation of Marines from Okinawa to Guam. I want to reiterate that our treaty commitment to Japan's security is absolute, and that Article 5 covers all territories under Japan's administration, including Senkaku Islands. We share a concern about China's land reclamation and construction activities in the South China Sea, and the United States and Japan are united in our commitment to freedom of navigation, respect for international law, and the peaceful resolution of disputes without coercion. We also remain united in pursuit of peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and addressing North Korean provocations. We fully support Japan's efforts to resolve the tragedy of North Korea's abduction of Japanese citizens. During my last visit to Japan, I met with the mother of one of those abductees, and she described the awful pain that she has endured, so I know how important this is to the Japanese people. Meanwhile, our growing trilateral cooperation with the Republic of Korea, as well as with Australia, gives us new opportunities to enhance security across the region. With respect to trade, we reviewed the progress our teams have made towards the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I know that the politics around trade can be hard in both our countries, but I know that Prime Minister Abe, like me, is deeply committed to getting this done, and I'm confident we will. I often point out, for example, there are many Japanese cars in America. I want to see more American cars in Japan as well. TPP will help level the playing field. It will be good for the workers of both our countries. And moreover, TPP will have strong protections for workers in the environment and help us set high standards for trade in the 21st century. Japan and the United States both operate with high standards in our companies and our corporations. We try to be responsible when it comes to corporate citizenship, and high standards will be good for us and good for the region. Based on the progress we've made, Prime Minister Abe and I discussed how the United States and Japan, as the 2 largest economies in the TPP negotiations, will now work together to lead our TPP partners to swift and successful conclusions of the broader negotiations. We also agreed to continue our close coordination on climate change. As the 2 countries that have made the largest pledges to the Green Climate Fund, we're committed to helping nations around the world seize the opportunities of transitioning to low-carbon economies. And we discussed the importance of all major economies submitting ambitious targets to reduce emissions so we can reach a strong climate agreement this year in Paris. And finally, we agreed to keep investing in our people so that they and our countries can reach their full potential. I want to once again commend the Prime Minister for his efforts to bring more Japanese women into the workforce. I can tell you it is very much my view here in the United States and around the world that when women are given opportunity, when they are full-fledged members of the political community and the economic community, when they have opportunity, those countries succeed. It's good for everybody. Along with the initiative we launched last year in Tokyo, we're also aiming to double student exchanges in the coming years. And with the leadership of our better halves, our wives, the United States and Japan are helping to lead our global initiative, Let Girls Learn, to give more young women and girls access to education. So these are just some examples of what it means to be true global partners. And I'm confident that with the steps that we've taken today, our alliance will play an even greater role in upholding security, prosperity, and human dignity, not just in the Asia Pacific, but around the world. So, Prime Minister Abe, arigato gozaimasu. Mr. Prime Minister.
Barack, thank you for inviting me to make an official visit in this commemorative year, which marks 70 years after the war. Thank you for inviting me and my wife. Walking together with you at the Lincoln Memorial, which has witnessed America tread the path of democracy, will be an extraordinary memory to be cherished. We have a dream. That is to create a world abound in peace and prosperity. To realize this common dream, Japan and the United States will together pave the way toward a new era. I was able to confirm this strong resolve with President Obama in this milestone year of 70 years after the war. Today, we turned a new page in the history of the U.S.-Japan alliance, which exceeds half a century. That is, this is a Japan-U.S. alliance within the context of the world. Japan and the United States are partners who share basic values such as freedom, democracy, and basic human rights and the rule of law. The U.S.-Japan alliance, characterized by the firmness of its bond, is now indispensable to the peace and stability of not only the Asia-Pacific, but to the world. We are united in our resoluteness in opposing unilateral attempts to change the status quo in whatever form. Any dispute should be resolved peacefully based on international law and not through coercion or intimidation. Japan welcomes the United States policy of rebalancing, which emphasizes the Asia-Pacific, and President Obama has expressed his support for Japan's principle of proactive contribution to peace. Through coordination of these two policies, the deterrence of our alliance will no doubt be further strengthened. Against this backdrop, we have reaffirmed our resolve to steadily move forward with the realignment of the U.S. forces in Japan. The dangers arising from the Futenma Air Station being surrounded by housing and schools should be eliminated by relocation to Henoko as soon as possible. We will move forward with mitigating the impact of the base in Okinawa, founded on a strong relationship of trust between Japan and the United States. It is prosperity that brings peace. This belief makes us eager to see the early conclusion of the TPP. On the bilateral outstanding issues, we welcome the fact that significant progress was made. We will continue to cooperate to lead the TPP talks through its last phase. We've confirmed that we would work together for the early and successful conclusion of the talks. In addition, with regard to the situation in East Asia, abduction by North Korea, nuclear missile issues, the situation in the Ukraine, the nuclear issue in Iran, and the threat of terrorism. Furthermore, climate change, infectious and communicable diseases, the UN Security Council reform. The world has a multitude of issues facing it. And on these all sorts of issues, we have had a frank and candid exchange of views, and we agreed that we would cooperate. When it comes to the future of Japan and the United States, there are infinite possibilities. Energy, infrastructure, science and technology, space, and in addition to this, the empowerment of women. We agree, that is between President Obama and myself, that we would cooperate and move forward in making investments for the future. I would like to express my due heartfelt respect once again to President Obama and the citizens of the United States who have committed to take on the multitude of challenges of this world, and for the unstinting efforts that you are making for the benefit of the peoples of the world. Yesterday, I visited the JFK Library in Boston. On television, I saw President Kennedy deliver his inauguration speech. It deeply resonated with me, and it still has a lingering effect. I recall the following quote: "My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of mankind."
一緒に何ができるのかを問うてほしい。日本はこの呼びかけに応える国でありたい。アメリカと手を携え、自由、
We want to work together with the United States to spread basic values throughout the world, such as those of freedom, democracy, basic human rights, and the rule of law. And we want to be a country that can contribute to peace and prosperity of the world.
今回の米国訪問にあたって全てのアメリカ国民の皆さんの温まる歓待に対して
I've had a very heartwarming welcome and reception by all citizens of the United States. I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude. Lastly, I'd like to emphasize the following.
バラクと2人でこの場所に立ち、
As we
まさに
stand
今日
here,
ここから
we will be
日
starting
米
a
の
new era for
新しい
Japan
時代
and
がスター
the
ト
United States.
70年後の
I think
子や
that
孫たち
70
に
years from now,
そう思ってもらえるよう
our
な
children and grandchildren
歴史的な
will look
会談
back
となったと
on the talks
思っています。
we had as one of such
ありがとうございます。
historical
Thank you very
significance. Thank you very much.
So we'll take a couple of questions, starting with Andrew Beatty of AFP.
Very much, Mr. President. First of all, I wanted to know if you think there's a risk in this more assertive US-Japanese security stance, if you think there's a risk that it might be seen as a provocation in Beijing, Pyongyang, or heightened tension in these South China Seas. And for Mr. Abe, if I may, you stopped short of a full apology for Japan's actions during World War II, including with regard the estimated 200,000 women enslaved by imperial forces. Would you make an apology for that today? Thank you.
I think it's very important to recognize that the U.S.-Japan alliance hasn't just been good for the United States and Japan, it's been good for the Asia-Pacific region and the world. The basic foundation of peace, stability, ensuring that territorial borders were respected, freedom of navigation, all that has underwritten the incredible growth that's taken place in the Asia-Pacific region. China's benefited from it. It's on that basis that China became an economic juggernaut that ended up being incorporated into global trade. And so, no, we don't think that a strong U.S.-Japan alliance should be seen as a provocation. We should it should be seen as a continuation of the important work that we've done to ensure that you have a stable area where there are diplomatic conflicts, a healthy economic competition, but largely we've been able to maintain forward progress for a whole host of nations. And our treaty alliances have been critical to that. The U.S. serving as an Asia-Pacific power has been critical to that. And as I've said before, we welcome China's peaceful rise. We think it's good not only because China is a booming potential market. We think it's good not only because it allows China potentially to share some burdens with us in helping countries that are not as far along develop. But we think it's just good that hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens have been able to rise out of poverty at a credible speed over the last several years. They could not have done that had it not been for a stable trading system and world order that is underwritten in large part by the work that our alliances do. I think it is going to be important for us to continue to adapt to new challenges. So part of the goal here is that the same principles that the alliance was founded on continually update to concerns about cyber threats, that we are nimble and responsive to potential conflicts that may arise because of maritime disputes. But I think we have to do it in a way that brings in China and other countries into a common effort to maintain order and peace in the region. We are seeking to strengthen military-to-military cooperation with China, even as we continue to upgrade our alliance efforts. Obviously, the Republic of Korea is a critical part of our alliance structure as well, and the trilateral work that we do is going to be also very, very important. I don't want to minimize, though, the fact that there are some real tensions that have arisen with China around its approach to maritime issues and its claims. But that's not an issue that is arising as a consequence of the U.S.-Japan alliance. It's primarily a conflict between China and various claimants throughout East Asia and Southeast Asia, in which they feel that rather than resolve these issues through normal international dispute settlements, they are flexing their muscles. And we've said to China what we would say to any country in that circumstance. That's the wrong way to go about it. And we will continue to work with all countries in the region, starting with our treaty allies, to make sure that basic international norms continue to be observed.
On the issue of conflict women, I am deeply pained to think about the conflict women who experienced immeasurable pain and suffering as a result of victimization due to human trafficking. approximately $12 million in 2014 and decided that it would provide approximately $22 million in 2015.
That's fine. いずれにせよですね。いずれにせよ、21世紀は女性の人権が決して侵されることのない政治にしていきたい。
where women's rights is never infringed upon, and that is our strong resolve. Thank you very much. Hara from NHK. I'd like to address this question to Prime Minister Abe and President Obama. In the East China Sea and in the South China Sea, China continues to make forays into the oceans, and the Islamic State is still very active. How does the United States and Japan intend to collaborate, and what do you expect of each other in terms of actions taken by the respective countries? In Japan, with regard to the acceptance of exercise of collection self-defense and the new guidelines, there is a strong concern that Japan will become involved in America's wars. How does Prime Minister Abe intend to dispel these fears, and what is President Obama's take on these concerns? First of all, on extremism and radicalism, which is on the rise. The world community should unite to counter such extremism.
まさに私はカイロにおいて中庸こそ最善というスピーチをいたしました。過激主義と前面に立って対応している穏健派
there are moderates who are at the very forefront facing extremism, and we want to support this.
過激主義の台頭によって
With the rise of extremism,
難民となった方々への支援、そして難民の方々が
and also through the influx of refugees, there are countries who are faced with difficulties. To these countries, it's important that we provide support appropriately. And to the moderate countries, we need to tell them that they are not alone, they are not isolated. In the international society, the moderate countries should be supported, and we need to express that at all times. I believe that is important. In the Middle East, there are people who are living there. Improving the welfare and livelihood of these peoples are areas in which we'd like to make efforts. From such a standpoint, the United States and Japan would like to cooperate to respond to the challenges. Another point, the guideline, the defense guidelines, and with regard to the security legislation, that we may be involved, get caught up in wars. People tend to label this in some cases. It's very unfortunate. Labeling activities of this kind is not the first time it has occurred. In 1960, when we revised the security treaty, some people said that we would be involved in the wars of the United States. And that was the core of the criticism which was aired then. It's been 55 years since then. This criticism has been proved totally wrong, and that is very clear and evident. History has proved this. Our choice made at the time to revise the security treaty, and in case Japan suffers from aggression between Japan and the United States, we would respond through cooperation. And in the Far East, to maintain security, Japan's facilities would be leveraged, and U.S. military would leverage these facilities to conduct activities. Through such activities, Japan's safety would be was protected, and prosperity happened, and safety in Asia and the Asia Pacific has been maintained. To further strengthen this trend is provided for through the new guidelines, and seamless response is made possible, and by so doing, deterrence would be enhanced. Japan-US alliance would be more efficient and more functional. Deterrence and response capabilities would be heightened as a result, and this would lead to peace and prosperity of Japan and regional peace and prosperity as well. This is my firm conviction. In the streamlining of the laws, I should like to explain to the citizens and the Parliament in a detailed fashion.
Ultimately, the people of Japan and their elected representatives will be making decisions about how best to approach their defense. But I think it's important to note, as Prime Minister Abe said, that we have seen over multiple decades now that Japan is a peace-loving country, having absorbed some very difficult lessons from the past. Japan does not engage in aggression on the international stage or in its region, and that the alliance that has been built with the United States is principally one that seeks to defend our countries from potential attack or aggression. And what the new defense guidelines and the collective defense approach that Prime Minister Abe is proposing simply upgrades our ability to carry out those core functions. We do share, as people and countries all around the world share, a determination to eliminate the kind of barbaric terrorist acts perpetrated by organizations like ISIL that have resulted in the death of innocent citizens from the United States, from Japan, from other countries, and most of all from Muslim countries. And that's why we have a broad-based coalition designed to defeat ISIL. And we will continue to work with a wide range of countries around the world in our counterterrorism efforts. Japan's cooperation in that is vital and appreciated, but there are many ways in which coalition members participate. Japan's willingness and commitment to provide humanitarian assistance makes an enormous difference in countries that have been destabilized. Japan's willingness to serve in areas of peacekeeping and working with other countries to rebuild after they've been destroyed makes a big difference. So I think it's important to recognize we do not expect some instant and major transformation in terms of how Japan projects military power, but we do expect that Japan, like all of our allies and like ourselves, will continue to adapt to new threats, understanding that our basic core principle is not territorial ambition, it's not aggression towards others, but it is simply to defend prosperity and liberty and the sovereignty of countries, as we have done for a very long time now, as we have done together for a very long time. Chris Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, the National Guard is now on the streets of Baltimore, the latest aftermath in a series of what have been high-profile confrontations between black men and police officers. And there seems to be growing frustration among African-American leaders that not enough is being done quickly enough. Mark Morial of the Urban League said the U.S. is in a state of emergency of tremendous proportions. The president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund says we are in the throes of a national crisis. Are we in the throes of a national crisis? What are you prepared to do about it, both in terms of Baltimore and the larger picture? And what do you say to critics who say that since the death of Trayvon Martin, you have not been aggressive enough in your response? And to Prime Minister Abe, how important is a Pacific trade deal to keeping the influence of China in check, both economically and militarily? And do you agree with President Obama when he says that failing to complete a deal will simply further China's influence? Thank you.
Before I answer the question about Baltimore, I'm going to horn in on your question to Prime Minister Abe. I've been very clear that TPP is good for American businesses and American workers, regardless of what China's doing. And we will make the case on the merits as to why it will open up markets for American goods, American exports, and create American jobs. So this is not simply a defensive agreement. This is something that is going to be part and parcel of our broader economic agenda moving forward. And when 95% of the world's markets are outside our shores, we got to make sure that we're out there competing. And I'm confident we can compete. With respect to Baltimore, let me make a couple of points. First, obviously our thoughts continue to be with the family of Freddie Gray. Understandably, they want answers. And the DOJ has opened an investigation. It is working with local law enforcement to find out exactly what happened, and I think there should be full transparency and accountability. Second, my thoughts are with the police officers who were injured in last night's disturbances. It underscores that that's a tough job, and we have to keep that in mind. And my hope is that they can heal and get back to work as soon as possible. Point number 3, there's no excuse for the kind of violence that we saw yesterday. It is counterproductive. When individuals get crowbars and start prying open doors to loot, they're not protesting. They're not making a statement. They're stealing. When they burn down a building, they're committing arson. And they're destroying and undermining businesses and opportunities in their own communities that rob jobs and opportunity from people in that area. So it is entirely appropriate that the mayor of Baltimore, who I spoke to yesterday, and the governor, who I spoke to yesterday, work to stop that kind of senseless violence and destruction. That is not a protest. That is not a statement. It's people, a handful of people taking advantage of a situation for their own purposes, and they need to be treated as criminals. Point number 4, the violence that happened yesterday distracted from the fact that you had seen multiple days of peaceful protests that were focused on entirely legitimate concerns of these communities in Baltimore, led by clergy and community leaders, and they were constructive and they were thoughtful, and frankly didn't get that much attention. And one burning building will be looped on television over and over and over again, and the thousands of demonstrators who did it the right way, I think, have been lost in the discussion. The overwhelming majority of the community in Baltimore, I think, have handled this appropriately, expressing real concern and outrage over the possibility that our laws were not applied evenly in the case of Mr. Gray, and that accountability needs to exist. And I think we have to give them credit. My understanding is you've got some of the same organizers now going back into these communities to try to clean up in the aftermath of a handful of protesters, a handful of criminals and thugs who tore up the place. What they were doing, what those community leaders and clergy and others were doing, that is a statement. That's the kind of organizing that needs to take place if we're going to tackle this problem, and they deserve credit for it, and we should be lifting them up. Point number 5, and I've got 6, because this is important. Since Ferguson and the task force that we put together, we have seen too many instances of what appears to be police officers interacting with individuals, primarily African American, often poor, in ways that raise troubling questions. And it comes up, it seems like, once a week now, or once every couple of weeks. And so I think it's pretty understandable why the leaders of civil rights organizations, but more importantly, moms and dads across the country might start saying this is a crisis. What I'd say is this has been a slow rolling crisis. This has been going on for a long time. This is not new. And we shouldn't pretend that it's new. The good news is that perhaps there's some newfound awareness because of social media and video cameras and so forth that there are problems and challenges when it comes to how policing and our laws are applied in certain communities, and we have to pay attention to it and respond. What's also good news is the task force that was made up of law enforcement and community activists that we brought together here in the White House have come up with very constructive, concrete proposals that, if adopted by local communities and by states and by counties, by law enforcement generally, would make a difference. Wouldn't solve every problem, but would make a concrete difference in rebuilding trust and making sure that the overwhelming majority of effective, honest, and fair law enforcement officers, that they're able to do their job better because it will weed out or retrain or put a stop to those handful who may be not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, the challenge for us as the federal government is that we don't run these police forces. I can't federalize every police force in the country and force them to retrain, but what I can do is to start working with them collaboratively so that they can begin this process of change themselves. And we, coming out of the task force that we put together, we're now working with local communities. Department of Justice has just announced a grant program for those jurisdictions that want to purchase body cameras. We are going to be issuing grants for those jurisdictions that are prepared to start trying to implement some of the new training and data collection and other things that can make a difference. And we're going to keep on working with those local jurisdictions so that they can begin to make the changes that are necessary. I think it's going to be important for organizations like the Fraternal Order Police and other police unions and organizations to acknowledge that this is not good for police. We have to own up to the fact that occasionally there are going to be problems here, just as there are in every other occupation. There are some bad politicians who are corrupt. There are folks in the business community or on Wall Street who don't do the right thing. Well, there's some police who aren't doing the right thing. And rather than close ranks, what we've seen is a number of thoughtful police chiefs and commissioners and others recognize they got to get their arms around this thing and work together with the community to solve the problem. And we're committed to facilitating that process. So the heads of our COPS agency that helps with community policing, they're already out in Baltimore. Our head assistant attorney general for the Civil Rights Division is already out in Baltimore. But we're going to be working systematically with every city and jurisdiction around the country to try to help them implement some solutions that we know work. And I'll make my final point. I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, but this is a pretty important issue for us. We can't just leave this to the police. I think there are police departments that have to do some soul searching. I think there's some communities that have to do some soul searching. But I think we as a country have to do some soul searching. This is not new. It's been going on for decades. And without making any excuses for criminal activities that take place in this community, what we also know is that if you have impoverished communities that have been stripped away of opportunity, where children are born into abject poverty, they've got parents often because of substance abuse problems or incarceration or lack of education themselves can't do right by their kids. If it's more likely that those kids end up in jail or dead than that they go to college. In communities where there are no fathers who can provide guidance to young men. Communities where there's no investment and manufacturing's been stripped away. And drugs have flooded the community, and the drug industry ends up being the primary employer for a whole lot of folks. In those environments, if we think that we're just going to send the police to do the dirty work of containing the problems that arise there without, as a nation and as a society, saying what can we do to change those communities, to help lift up those communities and give those kids opportunity, then we're not going to solve this problem. And we'll go through the same cycles of periodic conflicts between the police and communities and the occasional riots in the streets. And everybody will feign concern until it goes away, and then we go about our business as usual. If we are serious about solving this problem, then we're going to not only have to help the police, we're going to have to think about what can we do, the rest of us, to make sure that we're providing early education to these kids, to make sure that we're reforming our criminal justice system so it's not just a pipeline from schools to prisons, so that we're not rendering men in these communities unemployable because of a felony record for a nonviolent drug offense, that we're making investments so that they can get the training they need to find jobs. That's hard. That requires more than just the occasional news report or task force. And there's a bunch of my agenda that would make a difference right now in that. Now, I'm under no illusion that out of this Congress we're going to get massive investments in urban communities. And so we'll try to find areas where we can make a difference around school reform and around job training and around some investments in infrastructure in these communities and trying to attract new businesses in. But if we really want to solve the problem, if our society really wanted to solve the problem, we could. It's just it would require everybody saying this is important, this is significant. And that we don't just pay attention to these communities when a CVS burns. And we don't just pay attention when a young man gets shot or has his spine snapped. But we're paying attention all the time because we consider those kids our kids and we think they're important and they shouldn't be living in poverty and violence. That's how I feel. I think there are a lot of good-meaning people around the country that feel that way, but that kind of political mobilization, I think we haven't seen in quite some time. And what I've tried to do is to promote those ideas that would make a difference, but I think we all understand that the politics of that are tough because it's easy to ignore those problems or to treat them just as a law and order issue as opposed to a broader social issue. That was a really long answer, but I felt pretty strongly about it.
First of all, on TPP. This is not something that we create out of consciousness about China. The economic growth of the region will be a positive and create opportunities for Japan, the United States, and the world. The TPP is such that to the eyes of many countries, it has to become a model.
You'll be watching their wide-ranging press conference with the Japanese leader Shinzo Abe and the US President Barack Obama at the White House. I'm Robin Kerno. You're watching CNN. Don't go anywhere. More news with Wolf Blitzer is up next.
From the shores of the Caspian Sea, in the ancient land of Azerbaijan, rises the first European Games. Be part of sporting history in Baku this June. The European Games, Baku 2015, rise to the occasion.
World politics, today's issues, and all the breaking news. Wolf, coming up next on CNN.
When you follow a story, you may be asked to take risks, and sometimes go down a path that's not marked. That's where you find a brotherhood risking it all, or a fighter who's had a change of heart. When you dare to take risks, you witness passion and persistence, and that's where change happens.
Coming up on Open Court, make way for the clay. The race to Roland Garros heats up in Monte Carlo.
There's no better place to start a clay court season than here.
Plus, they call him the mastermind.
The pressure she has is unbelievable because every time she wins, it's normal. And if she loses, it's what's happening.
Hear what it's like coaching world #1 Serena Williams. And wedding bells are ringing in Scotland. Andy Murray ties the knot. Sunday on Open Court.
In association with Rado.
I'm Will Ripley in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Tiredness that you see coming from this president, and it was there, I think, too, in the wake of Ferguson. He sort of reached the limits of his presidency in terms of what he can do about it, reached the limits even of his rhetoric. I mean, this was a president who came in, everyone talked about post-race, everybody talked about that wonderful race speech he gave in 2008, but now what is the question? And you look at the two parties, and in some ways, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, Democrats haven't wanted to talk much about poverty. They've been very, very tough on crime, wanting to appear like Republicans. It does feel like we're at a new moment, I think, with both of these parties, wanting to talk a little bit more about poverty, wanting to talk about criminal justice reform from the left and the right. So perhaps the president didn't seem too hopeful in terms of this Congress, but perhaps there's something that can be done.
All right, ladies, stand by because we have a lot to assess right now. To our viewers, I'm Wolf Blitzer, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us. We're following the breaking news. An American city under a state of emergency right now. We're talking about Baltimore, Maryland, trying to recover after a night of rioting looting, and chaos, and the situation remains tense right now. U.S. National Guard troops, they are on patrol. 500 Guard troops have already arrived and hundreds more. We are now told they're on the way. The National Guard says more than 5,000 military personnel are needed if they're available, if in fact they are needed, and presumably they will be. Looters picked through what's left of a burned up shoe store earlier this morning. Some businesses remain shut down. A shopping mall is closed because of security concerns. Schools throughout the city of Baltimore, and this is one of the largest cities in the United States, are off today. They're out. Some federal government workers were sent home early as a result. And once again, tonight's Major League Baseball game, the Baltimore Orioles game, has been postponed in part because of a 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew on the streets of Baltimore. The rioting broke out on the same day the family of Freddie Gray held his funeral. Gray's death while in police custody set off the initial wave of mostly peaceful protests, but his family strongly condemned the violence that erupted yesterday. And just moments ago, you heard it here live, President Obama was asked about the situation. He said his thoughts are with the injured police officers. He condemned the looting and the lawlessness.
There's no excuse for the kind of violence that we saw yesterday. It is counterproductive. When individuals get crowbars and start prying open doors to loot, they're not protesting. They're not making a statement. They're stealing. When they burn down a building, they're committing arson. And they're destroying and undermining businesses and opportunities in their own communities.
City of Baltimore has imposed a week-long curfew, as I noted, starting at 10 p.m. Local time until 5 a.m. Starts today. Some residents are trying to pick up the pieces and move forward. They were out earlier today cleaning up trash and debris. It's an enormous job that's underway. Our correspondents Ryan Young and Brian Todd, they're both in Baltimore for us. Ryan, give us a sense of what you're seeing, what you're hearing on the streets of Baltimore right now.
Wolf, what a big difference Dave makes. In fact, we saw many people come out here with to sweep up and also to come help clean up the community. You can see the police officers right here, but there's been a lot of counseling going down the line here. In fact, there's a group of older gentlemen that are standing here, and they are talking with the youth to make sure this remains peaceful. And this is a cultural extension because on the other side of this, you can hear the drums and you can hear people playing instruments. There's a group that's come out here to sort of entertain the crowd, to make sure things stay peaceful. But we've seen people from all over Baltimore coming out here to help clean up, coming with garbage bags and brooms to make sure they show that they are one Baltimore. A lot of the conversation here, Wolf, has been about the idea that the burning down of the CVS, which is across the street, has taken away from the idea of trying to find out exactly what happened to Mr. Gray. You can see some people are interlocking their arms, standing in front of the police. So far, the police and the protesters have remained separated. You can see the line that's here. If you look across the way there, that's the CVS. About a half hour ago, Jesse Jackson arrived here and talked to some of the members of the crowd. But so far, it's remained very peaceful. People having conversations, breaking down in the crowd, crying, and saying they need economic help, but they also want change and reform within this police department.
And Todd, you're there as well. Where are you? What are you seeing?
Corner of North Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue here. An impromptu street protest has developed here. There are people here, as Ryan pointed out, I'm not too far from where Ryan was. People here are kind of arguing among themselves, some factions arguing with others, an older crowd trying to push some of the younger protesters back, telling them that they've got to be peaceful. Some of the younger protesters saying they have a right to vent their anger. And it did get a little tense a short time ago. I'll take you back here where we're going to move among the protesters that are still talking. It's a little tight squeeze here, but this developed a short time ago when some of the riot police moved in to apprehend someone who was being very vocal in the crowd. When that happened, the crowd got more agitated, moved up against the police, started really becoming tense, but it then calmed down. And what's interesting is that a lot of the crowd, as we noticed last week in Baltimore, some members of the crowd, as you saw here, are self-policing. They're moving among themselves, telling their fellow protesters to calm down. one lady actually grabbed one of these things and used it as a bullhorn, talking to people, yelling at people to back off. So, I mean, they're doing some self-policing today in this impromptu street protest. It's a little bit festive on occasion. You've got some music and some drums playing here. So it has been a healthy atmosphere of protest at this intersection so far, Wolf. But again, you've always got this this energy right below the surface that is right there and kind of ready to explode. So anything could happen at any moment here on the streets, even in daylight. All eyes, of course, will be on this area when darkness descends and when the curfew is imposed. This area was the scene of some of the worst looting, some of the worst violence last night that we witnessed. Stores being ransacked and burned, cars being burned, officers being injured. So keep a close eye on this section of Baltimore today, Wolf.
Let's hope the people there heed the advice of the President of the United States. Go ahead and have peaceful protests, but don't do the looting, don't do the arson, don't do the violence, because you're going to wind up in jail. We'll get back to you, Brian. As a lot of people around the country woke up this morning, they heard about the looting, they heard about the damaged buildings, the businesses that have been destroyed, the arrests, the injured in Baltimore. Let's not forget, this was also a day that the Gray family wanted to mourn. The attorney, Mary Koch, is joining us now. She represents Freddie Gray's family. Mary, thanks very much for joining us. How's the family reacted to the violence that erupted yesterday?
The family is, I want to use the word disappointed. I've used that word before. The family really hoped that Freddie's legacy would be that positive change would be made. They'd get answers to the question of what happened to their son, to their brother, but that it also would be a moment of positive change and moving forward. And unfortunately, with the violence that occurred yesterday, it detracted from Freddie's story and the questions surrounding Freddie's death and did not honor his legacy, in their opinion.
So what do they want the community to do now?
They want the community to do what the community did when Saturday began, which is the peaceful protest. The peaceful protest that showed this to the city police department, to the city as a whole, to the state, to the country, that these are things that happen, that you may not be familiar with them. They may not be things that happen in your life, but there are things that happen in this country, that we need to look carefully at them. We need to answer the questions, that police and government needs to be accountable to the people and answer the questions when the questions are asked, and that in some way, shape, or form, the peaceful protests continue to keep the pressure on, to keep hopefully to get the answers started rolling so that we can finally have some understanding of what occurred on that day.
Well, have you received any answers from the mayor, from the police commissioner, from others about what happened to Freddie Gray? He was taken into police custody. He was arrested. Then he wound up with a broken neck, a broken spinal cord. He went into a coma, and he died in the hospital a few days later. Have they given you any answers yet?
Absolutely not. We get the same answers that you and the press get. We have asked certain questions. There are certain pieces of information that are going to remain the same regardless of what happens, that are not going to affect the criminal investigation. And that is things like the transmissions between the police officers, that we give some indication of what was going on with Freddie Gray as he was being transported throughout the city and finally arrived at the Western District. The information from the paramedics report about what they saw and what they did to render aid to Freddie Gray. Information about what other video surveillance have you gathered that the public should see, that answer or give some insight into what was actually going on. These statements of the police officers, they're not going to change. Those things that are not going to change are in no danger of affecting negatively the criminal investigation, because they will always be what they are. They are memorialized in time. They are, for example, the transmissions of police officers' 911 tapes are routinely released pursuant to PIA requests, pursuant to requests of the police department to release that information. That is public information. The public has a right to know. The public has a right to transparency, and the family has a right to some answers. And to the extent they can be given, it needs to start now.
Did you have a chance, Mary, to hear the 6 points the President of the United States laid out, asked about what's going on in Baltimore?
I did. I absolutely did. I listened very carefully to what the president had to say.
And what did you think?
And if you want, You know, what I think always, which may sound like something that's such a simplistic answer, but what I really think is what we really, the basis of everything that he's saying is we need to treat each other with basic human respect. We need to interact with people, whether those people come from, if I'm going to use Baltimore references, whether those people come from Roland Park, which is a place where it's more expensive to live, or Pennsylvania North Avenue, where it is not as expensive to live. People in those communities should be treated and interacted with exactly the same. And until we start to recognize that, and until we start to make our police officers accountable for their interactions with the community, things are not going to change. That's number one. Number two, what I think is really important about what he said is there needs to be a partnership between the community and the police department. And I think that the way in which policing occurs now, there's not that same sort of thing that we had probably a decade or so ago, where we were really focused in Baltimore on community policing, setting up PAL centers, setting up kiosks in neighborhoods, forging relationships between the officer who worked in that district and in that beat and the people that he was protecting and serving. And I think that we need that again, because you establish those on a personal level.
Mary, I just wanted to interrupt for a moment. They've just detained, looks like they've just arrested someone. There you see it right now. These are live pictures coming in. I don't know what this individual is being detained for. Actually, this is videotape that just is coming in, but you see at least one individual has just been detained. Police there with their shields, with their helmets, their batons. They're going through this crowd. We're also beginning to see some smoke there. Let's hope it doesn't escalate, but clearly a tense moment. We're going to stay on top of this. I want to thank you, Mary Koch, the attorney for Freddie Gray's family, for joining us. We'll continue our conversations down the road. These are live pictures. Once again, you see a row of police now standing, protesters on the other side. A sensitive time indeed. National Guard troops, they are also on the streets of Baltimore. They're pairing with local police in a show of force after a night of violent rage and rioting. Joining us now from Atlanta, Cedric Alexander. He's the Chief Operating Officer for Public Safety in DeKalb County, Georgia. He's also the President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and a key member of the White House Task Force on Community Policing. Joining us as well is from Los Angeles, the City Councilman, the former Chief of Police, Bernard Parks, and also Deputy Chief during the Rodney King riots, which incidentally began 23 years ago tomorrow. To both of you guys, thanks very much for joining us. Chief Parks, first of all, your reaction to what's going on in Baltimore, specifically how the police handled themselves yesterday.
You know, I think, Wolf, that you have to look at the circumstances that we have seen over time, that little is gained by allowing a crowd to get not only animated, but to get involved in criminal behavior and not take positive action against that. It destroys the ability to have a peaceful march, a peaceful demonstration. It allows the criminals in the crowd to take over the circumstances and to then get where we are today, where buildings are burned down and the communities in upheaval. So I think that is, we saw it again in Ferguson in the first couple of days, where decisions were made not to take aggressive action. You have to stop criminal behavior before it takes over the city.
A good point. Cedric, I want to move on and look ahead, but let's look back briefly right now. Where was there a blunder yesterday? Because clearly this is not what the mayor wanted. This is not what the police commissioner wanted. But we saw, not for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, for maybe 2 hours, looting going on, especially at that CVS pharmacy. I didn't see police vehicles rush to the scene. I didn't see police officers go there. I assume a lot of those young guys who were looting that pharmacy would have run away if the police would have shown up.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be careful, Wolf, here, because I think what may have occurred, and of course I'm not there in Baltimore, is that I don't think they expected, once school let out, that they would have such a situation on their hand. It appears that they may have been just unprepared for what emerged very, very quickly and very rapidly upon them. And when they tried to bring in the resources they needed, it may have just taken a little bit longer than they had anticipated. The thing about this, Wolf, and I've said this before, there's no specific playbook to this. If we go back, we look at Ferguson, we saw a lot of clear mistakes that were made that we all frowned upon. I think the city of Baltimore took a much less harsher approach, but what happened, things sped up very quickly for them as well too. So it's trying to make that balance in decisions as to how much force do you apply or how much do you not. And in this particular case, it didn't work out very well for them, but it appears that they're much more prepared today. At least let's hope so. It's going to be a long day.
Let's hope they are better prepared today. Chief Parks, your thoughts, because it was so frustrating. We were all watching it live on television right here on CNN. All the local stations in Baltimore were showing live helicopter pictures of what was going on, the looting there. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I assumed the police would show up. They didn't show up basically for at least 2 hours, and only after the fire started and the fire engines couldn't get there, firefighters couldn't get there, and eventually they got there. Is there any rational explanation why the police didn't at least show up at that pharmacy or that liquor store or that cell phone store or the check cashing store and stop what was going on?
Well, there's only two things could have occurred. One, if they were in overwhelm and they did not have the necessary resources and they couldn't deploy them safely, that would be one reason. If there was a conscious decision not to respond and allow it to play itself out, that's another decision. That's the only two things that I can think of that could have occurred, because if you are addressing this and you're in overwhelm, you're not going to send a small contingent of officers in to become overwhelmed and not be able to handle the situation. But again, 2 hours in many instances with mutual aid and a variety of things that are in place throughout the nation, it would appear that you could assemble resources to at least have a visible presence.
Yeah, you would have thought. I'm sure they're going to be reviewing that, get some lessons learned down the road, not only in Baltimore, but other communities as well. If both of you can stand by, Bernard Parks, Cedric Alexander, I want to go quickly back to Ryan Young, our reporter who's on the streets. It's still, I just want to be precise, Ryan, it's pretty peaceful right now. There have been 1 or 2 violent incidents, right?
Wolf, let's be honest here. Look, I've been here the entire afternoon talking to people here in the community, and honestly, we haven't really experienced anybody who seemed like they were going to be really violent. In fact, right now, the crowd is dancing around us. They're doing a circle around the entire area where people are protesting, and you can hear the music that's in this direction. We're going to walk a little closer. This right here is called capoeira. It's a Brazilian Afro martial art, and that's what they're doing in the middle of the street here, showing this while everyone is kind of calmed down. They don't have the same sort of issues that we've seen before. Now, there has been some back and forth in terms of people yelling at the police and being upset, but it has stayed at a distance, not the same kind of anger that we saw or experienced from yesterday. I've talked to the people here in the crowd, and they say they're trying to make a bigger difference in terms of making sure their voices are heard, but it doesn't get out of hand. And you can see a lot of children here as well. This is the crowd, black and white, came here earlier to clean up. They're handing out water to each other. Do not feel that kind of tension that you feel like anything could explode at any time. And they're making sure they keep the media accountable. So one of the things they wanted to talk about today is, yes, that CBS is burned down across the street. They wanted to rebuild and talk about that today in terms of having this community not have what happened just a few hours ago.
Ryan, I'm going to have you stand by as well. I want to bring in DeRay McKesson. He's a community activist who we first met in Ferguson, Missouri. He's now in Baltimore as part of a peaceful protest. DeRay, thanks very much for joining us. What's your plan today? What's your mission in Baltimore?
You know, we're here supporting the protesters on the ground and continuing the movement. You know, there's been a lot of positive demonstrations over the past couple months here in Baltimore and across the country because the police have continued to kill people. And tonight will be another night where people come out into the streets to confront a system that is corrupt.
But you want peaceful protest, right?
Yes, for sure. Yep. And remember, the people that have been violent since August have been the police. We think about the 300 people that have been killed this year alone, like that is violence. There's been property damage here that's been really unfortunate over the past couple for a day or so here. But remember, there have been many days of peaceful protest here in Baltimore City and in places all around the country.
But at least 15 police officers have been hurt, 200 arrests, 144 vehicle fires. These are statistics. Local police have put out 15 structure fires. There's no excuse for that kind of violence, right?
Yeah, and there's no excuse for the 7 people that the Baltimore City Police Department has killed in the past year either, right?
We're not making comparisons. Obviously, we don't want anybody hurt, but I just want to hear you say that there should be peaceful protests, not violent protests, in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, there should be peaceful protests, and I don't have to condone it to understand it, right? That the pain that people feel is real, and you are making a comparison. You are suggesting this idea that broken windows are worse than broken spines, right? And what we know to be true is that the police are killing people everywhere. They're killing people here. 6 police officers were involved in the killing of Freddie Gray, and we're looking for justice there. And that's real, right? That, like, the violence that the police have been inflicting on communities of color has been sustained and deep.
But you agree, I assume, with President Obama, who just said a few moments ago, there's no excuse for the violence that erupted yesterday. There's no excuse for the stealing, no excuse for the arson. You agree with the president?
What I agree with is that I advocate people to peacefully protest. I also know that pain manifests in different ways, and I don't have to condone it to understand it. People are grieving and people are mourning. And I would advocate personally for people to do it in ways that you are calling peacefully. But again, I also know that Freddie Gray will never be back and that those windows will be.
And the president also said, President Obama, he said the violence, he said, distracted from the peaceful protests and distracted from the mourning that the family of Freddie Gray was seeking yesterday. Your reaction to that?
You know, we're distracted from progress is when city officials get on TV and call black people in pain thugs, right? That's a distraction. So, you know, I think that the unrest, the uprising, whatever you call it, is again a cry for justice here and a cry for justice across the country because the police continue to terrorize people. And again, the terrorizing is actually deadly. Broken windows are not broken spines. People are in pain. So I think that the president, I hope that he understands the conditions that created the unrest and that continue the unrest, not only here in Baltimore, but across the country, because Freddie Gray will never see another day, and neither will Tamir or Ayanna or Mike Brown.
DeRay McKesson is a community organizer. He's in Baltimore right now, was in Ferguson. DeRay, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to go back to Ryan Young. He's on the streets of Baltimore right now. Ryan, update our viewers who may just be tuning in. What's the latest?
Wolf, we're walking our way through this crowd and talking to people. Let me tell you something, mostly everybody's coming together. Look, if you look around us, you have people who are showing up with Oreo hats and coming from, look like they have baseball uniforms on because they're coming out to clean. They're being a part of the community. It's black and white. If you look here, you can see that the music has taken over the center of the street. And the crowd is now clapping in unison, all together, working throughout and talking about police issues. At the same time, yes, there have been some arguments about how it should be cleaned up or how it should be done, but everything has remained remarkably peaceful so far. Not the sort of tense moments that we thought we would see from a little bit earlier when there was some people yelling at the police officers. But the only thing that has happened so far over here, there was a shift change. But look, now the crowd has put a barrier between the protesters and the police officers. And that has been the mood throughout the day. I actually took off my badge and dropped the mic and just walked through the crowd for about an hour talking to people who live in this neighborhood. And they said they wanted to make sure this neighborhood was highlighted for the right reasons, not just what happened yesterday. Obviously, there were people who were crying over what happened here in this community because they realize it's going to be a long time before they get it back. But one of the things they wanted to talk about is the idea that they're strong as a community and they plan to rebuild and come back. And if you look at this crowd and you see what's going on, you can see the fact that everyone is coming together and not even from the same neighborhood. People just want to be a part of it, Wolf.
Let's hope it stays peaceful over there. Ryan, thanks very much. Ryan Young on the streets of Baltimore. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll also bring in into our special coverage a member of the Baltimore City Council. Much more of our special coverage from Baltimore right after this.
You know what makes things unique here? The people.
So we should make in India because of the people.
There's a solid research infrastructure, new government support. Things are changing.
We're looking for a joint venture partner for product development and process chemistry.
It's a billion-dollar growth sector in India. Firms that formulate, manufacture, and distribute globally. It's all here and it works.
CNN Go, sponsored by Korean Air.
I'm starving, so we're gonna go grab something to eat at one of my favorite spots, the V Sushi and Martini Lounge. I've been waiting to eat all day. I'm trying to get these Louisiana rolls, these lobster rolls, a little beef tataki. Ooh, I'm about to go in. With the new age of New Orleans and things are changing, there's a lot of different restaurants that are fusing some of the classic New Orleans foods with some new trends in foods from around the globe.
It's all about you. At the heart of our world is you. It's why our commitment to be the best will always be all about you.
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
Thanks to the power of global trade, life on planet Earth is changing faster than ever.
There's a news conference underway. Baltimore County Police are briefing reporters. Let's listen in.
Nothing to do with a safety issue whatsoever. And in fact, our messaging for the parents are, please let your kids stay in school. Please let your kids keep doing the things that they do day to day. There's no reason for anyone to deviate from a normal routine here in Baltimore County. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Well, we obviously got in at the very end of that, making a statement. We'll turn that video around. We'll see what they said. But clearly, this is still a major, major crisis, state of emergency underway in Baltimore. There's mostly peaceful, largely peaceful protests underway right now, though there have been a few incidents, some looting still going on, some arrests, but basically peaceful, at least for now. The numbers from the night of chaos in Baltimore, though, they are staggering. 202 people arrested. 144 vehicle fires, 19 structure fires, 15 police officers injured. Joining us now from Baltimore, District 7 Constable Nick Mosby. Constable, your city is under a state of emergency. There's a curfew in place from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I guess the bottom line question, how did it get to this point?
It's really rough to say. I mean, we saw, 2 weeks of quality protesting, very productive. And then unfortunately Saturday we had a small pockets of folks that were unproductive, and then yesterday it just quickly turned south. Some children, Baltimore City Public School high schoolers decided to do a purge movement via social media and got the word out, and they were going to meet up in a mall in West Baltimore, and the police met them and confronted them, and it quickly turned out of hand. Unfortunately, I think that we just weren't prepared the way that we should have been prepared for what took place on the streets. About 4:40 yesterday, I got stuck on the intersection of North and Fulton, and I saw a police car completely pummeled with rocks. I see the car set on fire. I was trying to get back to City Hall. The one thing I will say is the things that have been working to try to de-escalate and defuse the situation. I got together with about 200 to 300 pastors yesterday and walked the streets. We basically walked in front of the police towards the demonstrators and protesters and folks causing the violence to say enough is enough. And many of them calmed. It calmed for probably about 2 or 3 hours before it started back up again last night.
And it started up pretty violently. Why was the community, the police, the local law enforcement authorities, state, county, federal, why weren't they prepared for this? Because there was a lot of indications throughout the day, especially since Saturday night, that this could really turn ugly.
Well, Wolf, I know about 10 o'clock we sent emails off to try to understand and know what were the appropriate tactical operation steps and what we should kind of communicate to the community. I think, unfortunately, we really haven't seen urban rioting like this since the 60s. I mean, folks have constantly compared this to Ferguson, but it's a total different monster. I mean, West Baltimore is blocks upon blocks of streets and houses with abandoned buildings and abandoned residencies, and is really a good incubator for some type of rioting like this. I mean, the one thing I would want to stress, Wolf, is that, unfortunately, through this violence, which is going to overshadow probably 90% of the peaceful protesting, these folks, and I don't condone any of it, it's completely unacceptable, and we must develop enforcement to go after them. But these folks are really just expressing anger and frustration from decades old of systemic and structural issues in these poor urban communities. And this is not a West Baltimore thing. This is an urban American thing. And after we get calm, after we're able to calm the situation down, it's critically important that we develop priorities of going after and providing real opportunities for these young men and women who are crying out for help.
And we're just getting word, Nick, that as you can see on the screen, there have now been, according to police, 235 arrests, 34 of them juveniles. You were talking about social media. You were talking about that film Purge that seemed to instigate some of this. Tell us what was going on.
So yesterday, I have a young guy in my office from the community. He works in my office. He originally reached out to me, told me that his social media feed was filled with, come meet at Mondawmin, we're going to purge the city from Mondawmin to downtown. And he kept getting it on Facebook, he kept getting it on Twitter, kept getting it on Instagram. And so we immediately reached out and we found out that it was true and it was accurate. The police probably met the demonstrators with about 50 to 70 officers and some armored tanks, and they basically pushed the activity south onto the street, which is a main east and west thoroughfare called North Avenue in Baltimore City. When they did that, the protesters just kind of took it completely out of hand, and that's when, like I said, I was stuck. I saw police cars, windows bashed out, and it really continued for hours. And again, unfortunately, that time period of about 10 minutes of all the events that have taken place over the past 2 weeks is going to really overshadow all the productivity that's come out of folks trying to really exercise their right in their movement.
Yeah, Nick Mosby, I think you're right on that. If you could stay with us, I want to bring back Cedric Alexander. He's the president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, also from Los Angeles, the former chief of police, Bernard Parks. What's your reaction when you hear this city councilman make those points, Bernard?
Well, I think it's something that is evident in many of our cities. Poverty, lack of education, undereducation, unemployment, large return of people out of the state prison system. These are the same issues that were relevant in '65 riot in Los Angeles, same issues that were relevant in the '92 riot. And if you go through our communities and you add homelessness, mental illness, and the issue of veterans not being able to come back into their community, these are the same elements that are here today. And so you can use the police or the city government as a poster child for these failures, but if you don't get into the issue of the poverty, mental illness, mental health, what do you do in rehabilitating people coming out of prison? How do you educate our children? Why are we still in today's age undereducating the large population of children, particularly in minority communities? This will continue to fester.
Cedric, you're on the president's commission to come up with better policing techniques, better ways to deal with these kinds of problems. You heard the president of the United States make his points just a little while ago in the Rose Garden over at the White House. Long term, we know that there are enormous problems out there, but what needs to be done immediately right now to make sure we don't have another night like we had last night?
Well, that document that we were directed by the president to put together, it is very clear in there. There's 6 pillars in there, Wolf, and one of them, the beginning, the first pillar, of course, is building trust and legitimacy between police and community. If you were to go through that document, and I encourage everyone to pull it down from the U.S. Justice Department site, because in there are some things that we can do right at this very minute to begin to build relationships in our recruitment process of police officers, in our training, in the technology that we know we need going forward. But it is very, very important, regardless even of what's happening in Baltimore at this very moment. Relationship building is key, and it's going to be very important as that community and other communities across this country continue to move forward.
Nick Mosby, you're a Baltimore District Councilman. We know that there's a state of emergency in Baltimore right now. That's understandable. We know schools have been closed, at least today. There's not going to be a Major League Baseball game. The Baltimore Orioles aren't going to play tonight, once again, because of the 10 p.m. curfew in part. And there are thousands, literally several thousand National Guard troops on standby to come into your city if necessary. If the community starts seeing National Guard troops, military personnel, joining local and state police on the streets of Baltimore, what will be the impact?
I mean, immediate shock. It's surreal to sit and see, tanks, coming down streets and, armored folks all around the city. But it's also surreal to see buildings burning, cars on fire, folks running around with masks. I mean, Wolf, at the end of the day, no one wants to be in a police state, but it's also critically important that we attack this issue and we attack it immediately. We have to diffuse and de-escalate this as soon as possible, and we need the subject matter expertise that can make it happen. Obviously, the situation has escalated throughout yesterday into the night, and we cannot afford as a city, as a community, as a country to see that again, broadcasted throughout the world. These kids are not just Baltimore kids, these are American kids, and we have to get to them. We have to make sure that the folks who are causing the unproductive rioting, we have to make sure that we provide the right enforcement. And again, I will continue to stress this, I do not condone it, it's illegal and we have to go after it. But we also have to calm the situation as quickly as possible, because the longer we allow it to go on, the more destruction that can happen, as well as the more further the chasm between the criminal justice system, the police, and the community will continue to grow. I mean, this is an issue that's going to take time for healing. This is nothing that's going to happen overnight, but we have to de-escalate this situation as quickly as possible.
Well said, Nick Mosby. If you don't mind, stand by with us, Cedric Alexander Bernard Parks as well. Up next, we're going to speak with a leading son of Baltimore, a leader of the community, Congressman Elijah Cummings. He's standing by. He took to the streets to stop the violence last night. He lives in this community. We'll ask him what's going on right now, what needs to be done. Representative Elijah Cummings joins our conversation right after this.